Today I am going to introduce myself. I am Sri Duryodhan Meher, retired Principal Com, retired Reader in English, GPR College Kuntra, District Sambalpur, State Odisha. Today I am going to teach all of you, my friends and dear students, an interesting prose piece called Development of Polio Vaccines by Bonnie A.M.Okonek and Linda Morgenstern, editor. Introduction of the author. Okonek is an American microbiologist and fiction writer. Unit first warm-up. Polio mellitus or polio is an acute viral infectious disease that spreads from person to person, primarily via the fecal-oral route. Polio is a very serious disease which can lead to paralysis or even death. At one time, polio was one of the most dreaded childhood illnesses of the 20th century. The disease caused severe illness in thousands of children each year before the vaccine was introduced in 1955. Thanks to the introduction and widespread use of the vaccine, the number of cases has decreased significantly. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, was a victim of polio. Read the following text and note how FDR contracted polio. Text. In 1921, outbreaks of polioitis plagued America. That summer, a young politician named Franklin Delano Roosevelt was vacationing with his family at their Campobello estate. After an exhausting day fighting a local forest fire, taking a cold swim for relief, and then lounging in his wet swimsuit at home, he went to bed feeling as though he had contracted a cold. In a few days, Roosevelt found out he had polio. According to the author, when the author was young, it was in the year 1921, there was a breakout of polio which spreaded all over America. And in that very summer, a young politician called Franklin Delano Roosevelt was spending his vacation time with his family members at an estate called Campobello. When he was tired fighting for a local forest fire, he had a cold for swimming in the swimming pool, and he rested and went home. He found himself that he was suffering from a cold and cough. In a few days, Roosevelt found out he had got polio. मोर कहबार अर्थ जे 1921 मसीह एकदा बा से समय से वर्ष सारा अमेरिका देश पोलियो विराजमान कला। अन्य अर्थरे कहवाक गले पोलियो देखागला। सेई ग्रीष्म ऋतु रे जड़े युवक जे कि जड़े राजनैतिक थिले तांकर ना थिला फ्रांकलिन डेलानो रूजवेल्ट। से तांकर छुट्टी गुड़िक गोटे जगार कटाउले जो जगार ना थिला कैंपो बेलो। से रात्रि रे एकदा निया पाखरे छिड़ा होते तापर अन्य दिन से स्विमिंग पूल रे गाधेले जा फल थंडा है। तापर से जिते घर को फेरिले से जानवा को पाइले जे तांकर कहीं पोलियो रोग अच्छी। एज इट डिड विथ रूजवेल्ट, polio can strike quickly. The virus enters the body by nose or mouth and travels to the intestine where it incubates. A few days later, most patients are either asymptomatic or they experience flu-like symptoms such as headache, nausea, vomiting and fever. Whether they are symptomatic or not, people at this stage can pass the disease on to others. Polio can be spread through contact with infected feces or through infected droplets traveling through the air in food or in water. The virus next enters the bloodstream and the patient takes antibodies against it. In most cases, this stops the progression of the virus. Lifelong immunity against the disease is acquired. 10% of infected people develop symptoms and 1% develop the paralytic form of polio. I mean to say that when Roosevelt fell in polio, a new kind of disease which spread in America, it is known that the virus enters the body by nose or mouth and travels speedily to the intestine, where it creates its children or incubates. A few days later, most patients are either asymptomatic or they experience flu-like symptoms such as headache, nausea, vomiting and fever. Anyhow, people in this stage can pass the disease to others, and in this way, this disease spread all over America. And it is also travel through different kind of media like air, food or water. The virus enters the bloodstream gradually and patient makes antibodies against it. In most of the cases, this stops the progression of the virus. Lifelong immunity against the disease is also acquired. 10% of infected people develop symptoms and 1% develop the paralytic form of polio. मोर कहबार अर्थ रूजवेल्ट जितेबाला पोलियो रोगरे रोगाग्रस्त हेले से देखा पाइले जे से रोगर भूताणु गुड़िक शरीर के धीरे धीरे प्रवेश करुच्ची नाक बा मुह बा इंटेस्टाइन माध्यम रे एवं से भितर पशिकी से तार छोट छोट छुआ को जन्म देउछि। तापरे किछि दिन गड़ीगला परे अनेक रोगी माने अनुभव कले जे ताकू किपरि थंडा हेउछि बा थंडार लक्षण देखा जाउछि एवं जहा फल रे तांकर मुंड बा बांती बा ज्वर होउछि एवं एही अवस्था रे सेही रोगटा अन्यमान को मध्य डेई जाए। एही रोग द्वारा आक्रांत पोज एवं छोट छोट बिंदु रे बा माध्यम रे यथा वायु रे खाद्य रे पानी रे यह द्रुत गतिर विस्तार लाभ करे। तापरे से रोगर भूताणु गुड़िक धीरे धीरे रक्त स्रोत रे मिसी जाए एवं रोगी धीरे धीरे रोगाग्रस्त हुए। अनेक जगह देखा जाए यह भाइरस रो बा भूताणु रो उन्नति रे बाधा प्राप्त करे बा बंद करे दिए। एक गवेषणा जना पड़े जे 10% लोक माने यह द्वारा आक्रांतित होती एवं 1% पैरालिटिक फॉर्म ऑफ पोलियो रे आक्रांतित होती। रूजवेल्ट was one of the unlucky ones. His legs were left permanently paralyzed. In cases such as his, the virus reaches the brain and spinal cord where it multiplies and destroys the nerve tissue. At this point, the disease becomes spinal or bulbar, depending on which nerves are infected. Both forms are characterized by muscle pain, stiff neck and back, and possible paralysis. The spinal form affects the limbs, the bulbar form affects the lungs so that patients cannot breathe. After a severe attack of polio in its paralytic form, there is no treatment for the disease itself, although symptoms such as muscular paralysis can be helped with physical therapy. How much a person will recover varies from individual to individual. I mean to say that when Mr. Roosevelt fell ill by polio, he was the only unlucky person in the world. He thought himself like in that way. His legs were permanently paralyzed. In some cases, the virus reaches the brain and spinal cord where it multiplies more and more and destroys the nerve tissue. At this point, disease becomes spinal or bulbar, depending on which nerves are affected. It is known that both forms are characterized by or marked by muscle pain, stiff neck and back, and possible paralysis. The final form affects the spinal form affects the limbs, the bulbar form affects the lungs, so that patients cannot breathe. After a severe attack of polio in its paralytic form, there is no treatment for the disease anymore. And it is known that a person will recover varies from individual to individual and person to पार्सन। मोर कहबार अर्थ है जे रूजवेल्ट जेतेबेले पोलियो रोगरे आक्रांति थे से भाविले बोध से सारा विश्व सारा पृथ्वी रे से जड़े दुर्भाग्य लोक। सबुदिन सकाशे तांकर उभय गोड़ अकामी हो गला एवं केतेक गवेषणारू जना पड़े जे यार भूताणु गुड़िक धीरे धीरे मस्तिष्क तथा स्पाइनल कॉर्ड को प्रवेश करे एवं तांकर संख्या गुड़ाक बढ़ी जाती। तापरे यह तंतु गुड़िक नष्ट कर दे एवं यही प्रकार परिस्थिति रे यही रोगटा स्पाइनल बा बुलबार ऊपर निर्भर करे जोटा कि पैरालिसिस परिणत हुए। तापरे स्नायु बा मेरुदंडर स्नायु अन्यान्य अंग प्रत्यंग को नष्ट करी दिए। एतार द्वारा कलिजा मध्य मनुष्यर कलिजा मध्य बा रोगग्रस्त होइतवा मनुष्यर कलिजा को मध्य से बाधा प्राप्त करे। एवं यह मनुष्य ठारो अन्य मनुष्य भितर प्रभेद रहे कारण यह गोटे मनुष्य अन्य मनुष्य को धीरे धीरे प्रवेश करे। Unit second warm up. Do you know that children are the most vulnerable to polio? Read the following unit of the text below and note how or what steps FDR took to eradicate polio. Text. Roosevelt was determined not to let the major illness get the best of him. He not only continued his illustrious political career resulting in his well-documented and long-term presidency of the United States, but he went on to spearhead the fight against polio, increasing public awareness of the deadly disease and promoting research. Although polio never devastated large numbers of the population like the plague or influenza, it was a frightening, highly contagious disease that attacked both the poor and rich and arose in terrifying outbreaks which seemed impossible to stop in spite of advances in medicine. I mean to say that Roosevelt took a sort of determination to eradicate this disease for good or forever. He not only continued his illustrious political career resulting in his well-documented and long-term presidency of the United States, but also he went on to spearhead the fight against polio. As a result, public awareness increased gradually and that helped for research work. Although polio was devastated or polio was not devastated large number of the population like the plague or influenza, it was a frightening or contagious disease which attacked both the poor, rich and everybody else. मोर कहवार अर्थ जे रूजवेल्ट गोटे शपथ ग्रहण कले जे से दिने ना दिने सारा विश्व यही रोग को मूलपोच करदेवे। से तांकर राजनैतिक क्षेत्र में देखा पाइले बा से जितेबाला यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिकार प्रेसिडेंट थिले से समय यही पोलियो केमिति दूरीभूत हम से चेष्टा कले। तापरे यह द्वारा लोकों भितर जागरण सृष्टि है एवं से केमिति यही रोग को मूलपोच करेंगे तेणुक से सत चेष्टित हेले एवं धीरे धीरे यार गवेषणा करागला। प्लेग बा इन्फ्लुएंजा भलिया अनेक लोकों को यह आक्रमण कला। यह भयानक थिला एवं यह गोटे संक्रामक रोग थिला जोटा कि गरीब होना कहीं धनी होना कहीं समस्त वर्गर लोक मान को ये आक्रमण कला बा से माने यह द्वारा रोगाक्रांत हेले। तापरे औषध क्षेत्र में जेते उन्नति होना कहीं या को मूलपोच करवा भारी कष्टकर व्यापार हो पड़ा। थ्रू द फर्स्ट हाफ ऑफ दिस सेंचुरी बेसिक hygiene methods and knowledge had advanced tremendously. For the first time in civilization, people came to expect good health instead of merely hoping for it. But polio still attacked and children were the most vulnerable. Many people can remember seeing in the early 1950s heartbreaking posters of children on crutches or in iron lungs. The cumbersome mechanical aids which helped those whose lungs were paralyzed to breathe. Lacking a vaccine, parents throughout the country panicked, keeping their children from schools and other public facilities. Why could not a vaccine be found? So it was found that this very disease was a very deadly disease during that time or period. Basic hygiene methods and knowledge advanced wonderfully. For the first time in the civilization, people came to hope good health instead of merely hoping for it. And polio attacked in such a way that children, most of the children became affected by it. Many people or a large number of people remember in 1950s that heartbreaking poster of children on crutches or in iron lungs was seen on the walls. Due to lack of vaccine, parents all over the country were terrified, keeping their children from school and other public facilities or institutions, and it was known that why a vaccine of polio disease would not be found out. मोर कहबार अर्थ यही जे सारा शताब्दी रे यही रोगटा चारिआडे द्रुत गति रे आवृत कला, किंतु देखागला जे यार ज्ञान या उपरे ज्ञानटा धीरे धीरे बढ़ू अच्छी। प्रथम थर लगे सभ्यतार लोक मैंने आशा प्रकाश कले जे प्रकृति में आमर गोटे स्वास्थ्य शरीर दरकार किंतु पोलियो रोगटा एते जोर रे आक्रमण कला फल सहजरे छोट छोट छुआ माने बा बालक बालिका माने यह द्वारा आक्रांतित हेले। 1950 रे अर्थात 1950 रु 1960 दशक मध्य अनेक छुआ गुड़िक रोग रे आक्रांतित हेले एवं छोट छोट छुआ मानकर प्रतिछवि गुड़ाक कांथरे टंगा गला जो कांथरे से माने कौनसी आशाबाड़ी बा कौनसी लोहा युक्त आशाबाड़ी उपर निर्भर करी धीरे धीरे चलबार आरंभ कले। अनेक बापा माँ बा माता पिता अनुभव कले जे सारा देश रे यह द्वारा से माने समस्ते भय कले बा भयभीत हेले एवं से माने तांकर छोट छोट बालक बालिका मान को स्कूल गुड़ी को बा अन्यान्य अनुष्ठान गुड़ी को आउ छाड़ी देले नाही केवल घरे रखिले। यूनिट 3 warm up. Some baffling observations were made by the researchers in the early 90s in their attempt to find out a vaccine or for polio. Read the following text and note what sanitation has to do with the attack of polio. Text: vaccine development for polio had begun in the early 90s. However, early attempts failed partly because researchers did not know there was more than one virus. We now know that polio is caused by 3 strains or quite stable viruses that are a part of the enterovirus family, which have RNA as their genetic material. These viruses can remain infectious for long periods of time in water and foods. To be effective, a vaccine has to control immunity against all these 3 strains. I mean to say that vaccine development or development of vaccine of polio disease started in 90s. Anyhow, some attempts were found to be failed partly because researchers did not know there was more than one virus. People came to know that virus or polio was caused by 3 kinds of quite stable viruses that are a part of the enterovirus family, which have RNA as their genetic material. These very viruses remain infectious for long periods of time either in water or in food. To be effective, a vaccine or a new vaccine was found to confer immunity against all these strains. मोर कहवार अर्थ धीरे धीरे वैक्सीन रो उन्नति हैला किंतु प्रथमे प्रथमे यह असफल हैला बा सफल हैला नहीं। देखा गला जे गवेषक माने जानी पारिले नहीं जे गोटे भाइरस अछि ना अनेक भाइरस बा भूताणु गुड़िक अछंती किंतु देखा गला जे 3 प्रकार भाइरस अछंती जो ठारे के आरएनए बोली गोटे जीन रो पदार्थ रु जना पड़िला ଏବଂ ଏଇ ଭୂତାଣୁ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ଆକ୍ରାନ୍ତିତ ହୋଇକରି ଅନେକ ସମୟ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟନ୍ତ ପାଣିରେ ବା ଖାଦ୍ୟରେ ରହିଲେ ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ ଏହାର ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ତିଆରି ହେଲା। Ironically, before the 90s, immunity was acquired primarily during infancy because sanitation conditions were poor and efforts at sewage and water treatments were primitive. Babies were frequently exposed to polio viruses. These infants did not contract the disease because their mother's antibodies were passed on to them through breastfeeding. The babies then developed their own antibodies to the virus. So, immunologically, it was found that immunity was acquired primarily during infancy of the children, and in those days treatment of this disease were in primitive or primary condition. Small children were frequently exposed to polio viruses, and these children or infants did not contract the disease because their mother's antibodies were passed on to them through breastfeeding. The infants developed their own antibodies to the virus. मोर कहबार अर्थ जे प्रतिरोधक शक्ति धीरे धीरे कमी जाउची। छोट छोट शिशु माने बा छुआ माने सफा सुतरा हो नाहंती, तांकर पानी जीवार प्रक्रिया घरू पानी बाहरिबा प्रक्रिया ठीक भाव हो पारु नाही, जा फल छोट छोट शिशु माने एई रोगर भूताणु मान द्वारा आक्रांतित होउछंती। धीरे धीरे देखागला एई छोट छोट शिशु माने तांकर सहन शक्ति बढ़ी जाउछि। Paradoxically, when sanitation improved, infants were no longer exposed at an age when they were protected, so they did not develop antibodies to the viruses. Consequently, when they were exposed to the virus in later childhood and adulthood, they were at risk to contract polio. I mean to say that paradoxically or ironically, sanitation was improving day by day. Small children were no longer exposed at an age when they were protected, so they did not develop antibodies to the viruses, as a result of which they were exposed to the virus in later childhood or adulthood days, and they were at risk to contract polio. मोर कहबार अर्थ जे सफा सुतरा धीरे धीरे लोकों मध्य बढ़िला। छोट छोट छुआ माने आउ एई रोगरे आक्रांतित हेले नाही, जा फल से माने शिशु समय बा यौवन समय एई रोग द्वारा आक्रांतित हेले नाही। This understanding about the nature of polio grew through painstaking research over the first half of the 20th century. Much of it funded by the March of Dimes, a grassroots organization founded with the help of President Roosevelt. The organization decided to enlist the services of a respected researcher who was certain he could find a safe vaccination. In other words, this kind of understanding about the nature of polio grew through painstaking process research over the first half of the 20th century. It was provided by the march of dreams by financial aspects. Then a grassroots or lower level organization was founded with the help of Roosevelt, the then President of America. The organization decided to enlist the services of a respected researcher who was certain he could find a proper vaccine or proper vaccination. मोर कहबार अर्थ जे से समय धीरे धीरे गवेषणा बढ़िला यह 20 शताब्दी रे आरंभ हैला किंतु देखागला जे यार पैसा टी मार्च ऑफ ड्रीम्स नामक एक संस्थारू जोगाई दिया जाउतला एवं से संस्था को से समर प्रेसिडेंट रूजवेल्ट आरंभ करथिले। से संस्थाटी लोकंकर सेवा द्वारा तालिका रे अंतर्भुक्त हैला एवं गोटे संपूर्ण भाव में मुक्त वैक्सीन किपरि बाहरबो तापाई चेष्टा करा गला। यूनिट 4 वार्म अप। Dr. Jonas Salk was the pioneer in developing a vaccine for polio. Read the following text and note the contributions of scientists for the development of vaccine polio text. Dr. Jonas Salk had begun his medical research career studying immunology in 1947. While at the University of Petersburg, he began his research on polio virus. His research was greatly helped in 1949 when a method of growing polio virus in cell culture instead of having to use primarily monkeys for research was discovered. Salk needed to find a way to process the viruses so that they were less infectious before using them in vaccine. In 1952, Salk was the first to develop a successful vaccine using a mixture of the 3 types of virus grown in monkeys' kidney cultures. He developed a process using formalin, a chemical that inactivated the whole virus. मोर कहबार अर्थ जे डाक्तर जोनास सक तांकर गवेषणा आरंभ कले एवं तांकर गवेषणा माध्यम रे इम्यूनोलॉजी 1947 मसीह रे गवेषणा करले। पीटर्सबर्ग रे थिबा विश्वविद्यालय रे से तांकर एही गवेषणा को आरंभ कले। तांकर गवेषणा 1949 मसीह रे भल भाव रे साहाय्य प्राप्त होइथिला। डाक्टर सक देखिबाकू पाइले जे एई छोट छोट भूताणु गुड़िक रोगाक्रांत हेउचंती किंतु पूर्वापेक्षा कम भाव में रोगाक्रांत होउचंती। 1952 मसीह डाक्तर शॉक एक सफल वैक्सीन आरंभ कले जो वैक्सीन रे 3 प्रकार भाइरस पाइले तन्मध्यरु मांकड़ मानकर ब्रुक रे यह देखा मिलला। से फॉर्मालिन नामक गोटे प्रणाली आरंभ कले जो थे कि यही भाइरस गुड़िक बा भूताणु गुड़िक काम कला नहीं। What followed was massive testing of the vaccine in clinical trials in the United States and parts of Canada began in 1954. The scope of the trials was unprecedented in medical history. The results were dramatic. Cases of polio fell spectacularly in the vaccinated test groups. In 1955, the government quickly granted permission for the vaccine to be distributed to the children of our country. But there was a problem with the original Salk vaccine. The vaccine actually induced 260 cases of poliomyelitis, including 10 deaths. The problem was traced to the incomplete inactivation of some virus particles, which was soon corrected. Since then, the vaccine has been highly effective with a 70 to 90% protection rate. I mean to say that a very big kind of testing started about the clinical trials in a clinical trials in United States of America and some parts of Canada country, which began in the year 1954. The scope of the trials was not seen before in medical history. The result of it was very dramatic or was very wonderful. Cases of polio fell spectacularly in the vaccinated test group. In 1955, the government or the then government got permission for vaccine to be distributed to the children of that country. But there was a problem with the original Salk vaccine. The vaccine actually decreased 260 cases of poliomyelitis, including 10 deaths of people. The problem was found incomplete inactivation of some virus particles, which was soon corrected. And by that time, this very vaccine was highly effective with a sort of 70 to 90% protection rate. मोर कहबार अर्थ जे एक प्रकार विराट परीक्षा आरंभ करागला एवं यही परीक्षा सारा अमेरिका रे एवं कानाडा नामक देश रे आरंभ करागला एवं यही कार्यटा 1954 मसीह आरंभ होइथिला। देखिबाकू मिलिला ये प्रकार परीक्षा आगरू केबे मेडिकल इतिहास रे देखा जाई नथिला एवं एहार फल गुड़िक भारी आश्चर्यजनक थिला। 1955 से समर सरकार गोटे परमिशन पाइले कारण यार वैक्सीन को समस्त छोटे छोटे छुआ मान मध्य बंटा गला किंतु डाक्तर शंकर वैक्सीन अन्यत्र थिला से वैक्सीन धीरे धीरे 260 जगार किलोमीटर बा 10 जन हाराहारी 10 जनकर मृत्यु घटिला। এই সমস্যাটা ছোট ছোট ভ্যাকসিন গুড়িক মধ্যে দেখাগলা जोटा धीरे धीरे बा अति शीघ्र सुधारे नियागला से समय यही वैक्सीन ठीक हिसाब से काम न करता हाराहारी 70 ରୁ 80% यह विरुद्धात्मक थिला। In 1957, in an effort to improve upon the killed shock vaccine, Albert Bruce Sabin began testing a live oral form of vaccine in which the infectious part of the virus was inactivated. This vaccine became available for use in 1963. The shock vaccine is given into intramuscular injections spaced 1 month apart and requires booster every 5 years. Because of the way it is inactivated, the vaccine is safe for those with compromised immune systems. The 7 oral vaccine is given in 3 doses in the first 2 years of life and a booster is given when the child starts school. Further boosters are not given until or unless the patient is exposed to polio or will be traveling to an endemic region. The advantage of a live oral vaccine are its long-lasting immunity, the prevention of reinfection of the digestive tract and the lower cost of administering the vaccine orally because sterile syringes and needles are not necessary. However, a major disadvantage is that it cannot be used for patients with compromised immune system because it is a live virus and can cause disease in these patients. It also cannot be used by those in close contact with immunocompromised patients because the live virus in the vaccine can be shed in the faces of those who ingest it and can possibly be transmitted to the immunocompromised patient. Another disadvantage of the 7 oral vaccine is that those who have an enterovirus infection of the gastrointestinal tract when taking the oral vaccine may not develop the immune response. Clearly, both vaccines have their disadvantages and advantages with regard to relatively safety and cost. I mean to say that in the year 1957, a trial was improved about the killed shock vaccine. Albert Bruce Sabin started testing a live oral form of vaccine in which the infectious or affected part of the virus was inactivated. This vaccine became available or was found for use in the year 1963. The shock vaccine was given in two intramuscular injections by 1 month apart and requires booster every 5 years. It was inactivated by that time and the vaccine was safe for those with compromised immune system. The Sabin oral vaccine was given in 3 doses in the first 2 years of life and a booster was given when the child started schooling. Again, boosters were not given unless the patient was exposed to polio or would be traveling to an endemic region. The advantages of a live oral vaccine were its long-lasting immunity, the prevention of reinfection of the digestive tract, and the lower cost of administering the vaccine orally because sterile syringes and needles were not necessary. However, a major disadvantage was found and it could not be cause disease in those patients who were affected by it. It also could not be used by those in close contact with immunocompromised patients because the live viruses in the vaccine could be shed in the faces of those who ingested it and could possibly be transmitted to the immunocompromised patients. There was another disadvantage of the Sabin oral vaccine which was enterovirus infection of the gastrointestinal tract when it took the oral vaccine was developed the immune responses. It was clear that both vaccines had their advantages and disadvantages with regard to relatively safety and cost. More କହିବାର ଅର୍ଥ 1957 ମସିହାରେ ଏକ ପ୍ରକାର ଗୋଟେ ନୂତନ ପ୍ରଣାଳୀର ଗବେଷଣା ଆରମ୍ଭ କରାଗଲା ଏବଂ ଏହି ଗବେଷଣା ଅନୁସାରେ ସକ୍ ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ବା ଆଲବର୍ଟ ବ୍ରୁସ୍ ସାବିନଙ୍କର ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ଗୁଡ଼ାକ ମାରି ଦିଆଗଲା ଏବଂ ଏହି ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ସାରା ଆମେରିକାରେ 1963 ମସିହାରେ ମିଳିଲା ବା ଦେଖାଗଲା। ସକ୍ ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ଇଣ୍ଟ୍ରାମସ୍କୁଲାର ଇଞ୍ଜେକ୍ସନ୍ ମାଧ୍ୟମରେ ଗତି କଲା ଏବଂ ପ୍ରତ୍ୟେକ 5 ବର୍ଷରେ ବୁଷ୍ଟର ଡୋଜ୍ ଗୁଡ଼ାକ ଆବଶ୍ୟକତା ହେଲା ଏବଂ ଦେଖାଗଲା ଯେ ଏହି ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ଟି ଭାରି ଭଲ ଥିଲା ବା ନିରାପଦ ଥିଲା। Sabin oral ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ 3 ପ୍ରକାର ଅନୁପାତରେ ଦିଆଗଲା। ଜୀବନର ପ୍ରଥମ ଦ୍ୱିତୀୟ 2 ବର୍ଷ ପାଇଁ ବୁଷ୍ଟର ଡୋଜ୍ ଦିଆଗଲା ଯେତେବେଳେ ଛୋଟ ଛୋଟ ଛୁଆମାନେ ତାଙ୍କ ସ୍କୁଲ ଯିବାକୁ ଆରମ୍ଭ କଲେ। ପୁଣି ଦେଖାଗଲା ଯେ ବୁଷ୍ଟର ଡୋଜ୍ ଗୁଡ଼ାକ ପେସେଣ୍ଟମାନଙ୍କୁ ଯେଉଁଟା ଦିଆଯାଉଥିଲା ସେଟା ପୋଲିଓ ଦ୍ୱାରା ପଦାକୁ ବାହାରୁଥିଲା ଏବଂ ଏଣ୍ଡେମିକ୍ ସ୍ଥାନ ଗୁଡ଼ିକୁ ଏହା ଦ୍ରୁତ ଗତିରେ ଗତି କଲା। ଦେଖାଗଲା ଯେ ବଞ୍ଚିଥିବା ଓରାଲ ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ବେଶୀ ସମୟ ପର୍ଯ୍ୟନ୍ତ କାମ ଦେଉଛି। କିନ୍ତୁ ଏହାର ଗୋଟେ ଅସୁବିଧା ଥିଲା। ସେଇ ଅସୁବିଧାଟା ହେଉଛି ଯେ ରୋଗୀମାନଙ୍କ ମଧ୍ୟରେ ଏହି ରୋଗଟା ଆରମ୍ଭ ହେଲା। ସେଭିନ୍ ଓରାଲ ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ର ତା ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ କୁକାର୍ଯ୍ୟ ଥିଲା ବା ଫଳ ଥିଲା ଯେ ଯେଉଁମାନେ ଇଣ୍ଟରୋଭାଇରସ୍ ଇନଫେକ୍ସନ୍ ଦ୍ୱାରା ଆକ୍ରାନ୍ତିତ ଥିଲେ ସେଟା ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ ବଢ଼ିବାକୁ ପାଇଲେ। ତାପରେ ଏହି ଉଭୟ ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ତାଙ୍କର ଭଲ କାମ କଲା ବା କେତେକ ଜାଗାରେ ଖରାପ କାମ କଲା। Unit 5th. Do you know the WHO, the World Health Organization, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations that is concerned with international public health? Read the following text and note the contributions of the WHO for the eradication of poliomyelitis from the entire world. Text. The debate between safety and cost will continue, but we are fortunate to have two good alternatives to choose from. Both vaccines are currently in use throughout the world. In the United States, the 7 vaccine is used almost exclusively. In other countries, the Salk vaccine is preferred. Research continues to improve these vaccines. More effective culturing and purification techniques have been developed, allowing the vaccines to induce higher level of antibody formation. I mean to say that ଏହି ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ର ଉପରେ ଏକ ତର୍କ ବିତର୍କ ଆରମ୍ଭ ହେଲା, କିନ୍ତୁ ଦେଖିବାକୁ ମିଳିଲା ଯେ ଉଭୟ ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ ଗୁଡ଼ିକ ସାରା ବିଶ୍ୱରେ ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ ଆବୃତ ହେଉଛି, ଚାହିଦା ବଢ଼ୁଛି ଏବଂ ସାରା ଆମେରିକା ଦେଶରେ 7 ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ଟି ଭଲ ଭାବରେ ସମ୍ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଭାବରେ ବିନିଯୋଗ ହେଲା ଏବଂ ଅନ୍ୟାନ୍ୟ ଦେଶଗୁଡ଼ିକରେ ସକ୍ ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍କୁ ଆଦୃତ କଲେ ବା ଲୋକମାନେ ଆଦୃତ କଲେ। ଗବେଷଣାରୁ ଦେଖାଗଲା ଯେ ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ ଏହି ଭ୍ୟାକ୍ସିନ୍ର ଗବେଷଣାଟା ବଢ଼ି ଯାଉଛି। In the exciting research field of recombinant biotechnology, scientists are also attempting genetic alternation of the poliovirus. Researchers are using Escherichia coli as a host of bacterial gene cloning. Work is being done to take the genes of poliovirus, which code for the synthesis of the viral capsid, and to combine it with E. coli's genes. The E. coli can then synthesize viral capsid proteins to be used in making a vaccine. This latter approach eliminates any possibility of the virus infecting the vaccinated patient because the vaccine contains only a part of the virus, including potential dangerous content. मोर कहवार अर्थ यही जे यही वैक्सीन उपरे तर्क वितर्क करागला एवं सेही तर्क वितर्क अब्याहत रहिला। से देशर लोक माने निजको भाग्यवान मन कले एवं उभय वैक्सीन धीरे धीरे सारा विश्व रे आवृत हैला। सारा अमेरिका देश रे 7 वैक्सीन ता बहुल भाव बा संपूर्ण भाव व्यवहृत हैला, किंतु अन्यान्य देश गुड़िक सब वैक्सीन ता आवृत हैला। गवेषणा धीरे धीरे बढ़िबा को लागिला एवं वैक्सीन गुड़िक धीरे धीरे लोकंक द्वारा आवृत हैला। वैज्ञानिक माने यही वैक्सीन को धीरे धीरे वृद्धि कले बा तार गवेषणा बढ़िबा को लागिला। अनेक गवेषक माने यार केमिति नकल बाहरिबो ताकू चेष्टा कले। ई कोली नामक गोटे प्रणाली तैयारी करागला जो थरे कि वैक्सीन गुड़िक सारा विश्व रे धीरे धीरे लोकमान को द्वारा आवृत हैला। The discovery and use of polio vaccine has all but eliminated polio in the Americas. In 1960, there were 2,525 cases of paralytic polio in the United States. By 1965, there were 61. Between 1980 and 1990, cases averaged 8 per year, and most of those were induced by vaccination. There has not been a single case. There has not been a single case of polio caused by the wild virus since 1979, with a rare case reported each year from person coming into the country carrying the virus. In 1994, polio was declared eradicated in all of the Americas. In other words, gradually the discovery of use of polio vaccine was eliminated in United States of America. In the year 1960, there were 2,525 cases of paralytic polio in the same state. By 1965, there were 61 cases. Between 1980 to 1990, cases were averaged 8% per year, and most of those were decreased by vaccination. There was a single case of polio caused by the wild virus since 1979. And gradually, by the year 1994, polio was declared fully eradicated from the United States of America. देखागला जे धीरे धीरे यही वैक्सीन रो गवेषणा बढ़िबा को लागिछि एवं धीरे धीरे यार वैक्सीन सारा अमेरिका रे आवृत होउछि 1960 मसीह देखागला जे 2525 लोक माने एई रोग द्वारा आक्रांतित होउछंती 1965 मसीहा बेलू देखागला केवल मात्र 61 जन ए रोग द्वारा आक्रांतित होइतिले 1980 रु 1990 मसीहा मध्य यार संख्या कमी 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 8 संख्या रे परिणत हैला एवं धीरे धीरे यह कमिबाकू लागिला। एवं 1994 मसीहा रे देखागला जे ए पोलियो रोगटा सारा अमेरिका रो मूलपोच हो गला शेष हो गला। In 1988 the World Health Organization set a goal of eradication of poliomyelitis from the entire world by the year 2000. This is theoretically possible since the polio virus is found only in humans and humans can be immunized. Smallpox was the first disease in the history to be eradicated. It seems likely that polio could follow in its footsteps. It was found that in the year 1988, the World Health Organization or WHO was set a goal of eradication of the poliomyelitis from the entire world by the year 2000. It was a theoretical possible since the polio virus was found only in humans and humans could be immunized. Smallpox was the first disease in the history of mankind to be eradicated forever. It seemed likely that polio could also follow its footsteps or path. मोर कहबार अर्थ 1988 मसीह विश्व स्वास्थ्य और संस्था यही रोग को मूलपोच करने आरंभ करागला एवं देखा मिलला जे 2000 मसीह सारा विश्व यह सबुदिन सकाशे मूलपोच हैला एवं देखागला जे मनीष माने यह द्वारा केमती मुक्त हेउचंती एवं गोटे गवेषणा रो जना पड़िला जे स्मॉलपॉक्स नामक गोटे रोग जो रोग प्रथम सकाशे मानव इतिहास रे बाहरी थिला सेटा सबुदिन सकाशे सारा विश्व रो मूलपोच हैला एवं से भलिया धीरे धीरे पोलियो रोगटा मध्य मूलपोच होवाको लागिला। थैंक यू माय डियर स्टूडेंट एंड फियर फ्रेंड्स, दिस इज ऑल फॉर टुडे। थैंक यू।